Rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hi, everyone. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our March 8th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Seconded.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, they're approved. Time for lobby visitation. Mr. Mayor,
Hello again. Hi, my name's Joe DeMar. I live at 517 South Main Street here in Bowling Green, Ohio, and am a customer of BG Utilities. The last time I addressed the board at your last meeting, I had the privilege of speaking with a few of the board members after the meeting, and I was told we weren't trying to disincentivize solar power in regards to the new fees that are and the change in reimbursement rates for solar power in Bowling Green. But of course, that's exactly what this policy does. So the question to the board now is, what will the board do to rectify the situation? I was also told to watch past board meetings where the discussions that led to this decision were made on October 12th, 2020. I did that, and I want to thank the board member who made the suggestion. I learned a lot. I learned that every single thing that the board was told to justify this decision was demonstrably wrong. I touched on some of the errors in Mr. O'Connell's arguments in the last meeting. I won't repeat most of them again. You, of course, can go back and watch the video. But I will repeat the central error behind this misguided policy. And the statement was that those of us with solar aren't paying our fair share of delivery costs. That is the upkeep on BG's wires, poles, and transformers, because we are generating our own power. As I demonstrated last meeting, using actual data from my panels, this avoided cost, in my case, amounts to an average of about $3.50 a month. BG is proposing to charge me $24 a month, almost 8 times the cost, which solar power generators, we should not actually have to pay that in the first place, because we're not costing Bowling Green anything by generating our own power. As I demonstrated last week, we're actually benefiting Bowling Green demonstrably economically. So this was just one of the many ways Mr. O'Connell gave you inaccurate information. And so I can now understand how you came to the incorrect decision. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about some of the other errors that you were told. One, Mr. O'Connell stated he started the discussion around these new solar power fees by raising the specter of an imaginary solar power owner who in the future purposely oversizes their system to generate more power than their household needs. And in fact, part of the new regulations allows the city to limit the size of a new solar system to historical use. In other words, people are now not even allowed to generate more power than their household uses. Two things. This is very unlikely to happen on a large scale because solar power is such a high capital investment with such a long return that people who are just out to make money have a lot more profitable ways to invest. However, if this were to happen, it's not a bad thing. It would actually be an economic boon to the city of Bowling Green. Because right now, every kilowatt hour that BG Municipal Utilities has to buy from the out-of-state coal plant where we get most of our electricity, that's money that comes out of Bowling Green's economy. So when we buy locally produced power, when we buy electricity that's generated right here in the city of Bowling Green, it's like BG bucks on steroids. That money comes into the pocket of Bowling Green citizens, and it can be used to help pay utility bills, maybe go to Grounds for Thought for some coffee, or spend it in some other local business. Once the money goes off to Illinois to help support that coal, it's gone from our economy forever. So we should be encouraging as many people as possible to install solar so that we can buy from them and not Peabody Coal. And even if, and I happen to have one of the largest lots in the south side of the city because my house is on a double lot. And even were I to completely cover the south part of my lawn with solar panels, it would only amount to income of a few extra $100 a year. So this is not, it's not a real problem. It's not a likely problem. And really, it's not a problem at all. Were it to happen, it would be a benefit to everyone in Bowling Green. 2, you were also told in the course of the discussions by Brian O'Connell that these fees and penalties would result in a little bit lower return and a slightly longer payback for people who have solar panels. Now, when I installed my panels, my initial estimate on how long it would take to get paid back was about 10 years. Now that I have almost a year's worth of actual data, I find that the actual full return for my panels will be about 20 years. But that's okay because the system is at the current payback rate, the system is designed to last at least 25 years, and I can likely count on it lasting 30, maybe 35 years. With the new numbers, adding in the monthly fee, and with the reduced payback for the electricity I generate, the return on my panels is now 60 years. So my 25-year rated system will take 60 years to pay back under the new numbers. And it's easy to see this is not an exaggeration because the price per kilowatt hour I receive has been cut in half. So that doubles the payback time right there. And then adding in the new monthly fee, triples it again. So my payback would go from 20 to 60. My little bit lower return becomes almost no return at all. And the slightly longer payback is going to be probably slightly longer than I'm going to live. Since I'm 58 now, 60 years, I'm not going to, probably won't see that return. At another point in the discussion, Mr. O'Connell suggested that the infrastructure that we are currently supporting by buying coal and nuclear power is better because that's his adjective, because those sources of power are engineered to last longer, up to 100 years, as opposed to wind and solar installations, which are only rated for 25. I strongly disagree with this opinion. 100 years of coal is 100 years of carbon, 100 years of nuclear is 100 years of nuclear waste. Both of them call for another 100 years of mining and air pollution. Just because something is built to last 100 years doesn't mean we have to use it for 100 years. So I found that argument a little odd, but again, like so many of the statements you were told, easily refuted, demonstrably wrong. And another one of the things he told you was that in his opinion, homeowners would prefer getting a few dollars every month instead of a big check at the end of the year. That's wrong because my wife and I actually are on the cusp of going to retirement income and having a fixed monthly income. And we were kind of looking forward to that big check in December, which we'd use to buy Christmas presents and maybe do some travel to see family. This obviously is not a big point, but it's just another point where had Brian O'Connell talked to any of us that actually have solar panels, he could have gotten it right instead of getting it wrong. And in fact, what he did do, where he did get a lot of his information, he paid tens of thousands of dollars to a consultant firm that, in my opinion, wasted ratepayer money. They did not talk to those of us that have solar panels. They did not get any of our actual figures in terms of how much we generate or how much we use. Instead, they estimated everything badly. And they justified the reduction of the payment of our solar electricity from the current 10 cents per kilowatt hour down to 5.5. They based that on fantasy. They decided that they would be able to they used a number where if the city had had the foresight to negotiate with an actual utility scale solar producer, how much money would they pay in that case based on average contracts? But people that are involved in actually negotiating contracts can tell you that in reality, there's no such thing as an average contract. Every deal is different. There's no guarantee that if Bowling Green had the foresight to be buying solar power instead of coal and nuclear power, we could get that price. And as I've said before, as I said last week, those of us who are generating power for Bowling Green here in Bowling Green deserve to get just as much money as any other generator. Our power is better than their power. It's cleaner, it's more reliable because it's generated locally. And just simply deciding with a stroke of a pen to cut our reimbursement rate in half is another bad decision. So in conclusion, and of course, they, in their fantasy estimates, sort of, when it came to the question of peak power, they just kind of said, well, yeah, there is probably going to be some peak power, and let's just toss in a fudge factor of another, couple of half cents there to even out that peak power idea. But in reality, as we saw in Texas, peak power can be worth tens of thousands of times the normal rate in an emergency situation. And emergency situations are much more likely to happen in the future. So our power being generated right here by our solar panels during a peak period, during a crisis period, could be worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And so just to come up with a fantasy couple of cents to toss onto a fantasy base price does not, again, reflect reality. So in conclusion, you did not try to disincentivize solar. So like the kids playing baseball who didn't mean to break their neighbor's window, the question is, what do you do now? I mean, you did disincentivize solar. And I learned something else watching those videos. Something, if you recall, at the end of the last meeting, I asked what would the process be to get you folks to revisit this policy, to change your decision. And what I learned is that the policy for the Public Utilities Board is pretty much Brian O'Connell asks for something, somebody on the board moves to give it to him, and then you unanimously vote to give it to him. This is very efficient, but it's also something that we environmentalists call regulatory capture. You folks are supposed to be overseeing the utilities board. You're supposed to be in control of it. You have a responsibility to put into place policies that are better for Bowling Green, regardless of what the utility wants. It's their job to follow your lead. It's not your job to follow their lead. Because if you allow yourself as a regulatory agency, a regulatory board, to be led by the agency that you're supposed to be leading and regulating, you can be led to do things that are illegal. For example, you might be led to approve a $75,000 contract without city council approval, even though that violates municipal code. That's the sort of thing that happens when you let the agency that you're supposed to be running run you. And so I just wanted to say in conclusion, you may know Greta Thunberg, the young woman who has led a worldwide motion against carbon pollution and a leader of a great movement around the world. And what Greta Thunberg said is that right now, all around the world, leaders are saying the right thing and doing the wrong thing. And at this moment, since you are running the Bowling Green Utilities Board, those leaders that she's talking about are you. Bowling Green has put out millions of tons of carbon that it didn't need to over the past 7 years since we signed that contract with Peabody Coal. Now, those of us that are putting in seem to move us in the other direction. Right now, for example, my solar system, I just looked at my numbers today. So far, I've generated a little more, or I've prevented the generation of a little more than 3 tons of carbon dioxide since my system was turned on back last July. Now, 3 tons versus the millions that BG has generated is kind of a futile gesture unless more people join me. If hundreds of BG households, maybe even thousands, put solar on their house, we can make it happen. We can get off of carbon dioxide. We can get off of coal power and polluting sources of power. But right now, we're being prevented. Right now, we're being blocked by this policy. And so, as I said, I asked for the procedure on how to make a change. And as far as I could tell by watching a year's worth of your meetings, what happens is someone at this podium asks you to make a motion. Somebody makes the motion, it's seconded, and then you vote on it. So right now, I would like to ask you to make a motion to revisit this question, to change this policy. We don't have to get specific right now. This could be a sense of the board motion. And if somebody was willing to make that motion, then those of us with solar are more than happy to help you. Leatra Harper and I are working together on this. We've actually retained counsel, so we'd be happy to help you rewrite the regulation in a legal manner. You don't have to do anything. Just next meeting, we'll have it all ready for you. You can vote on the actual motion. So right now I'm asking, will someone on the board make a motion to reconsider these policies?
I just want to ask a question. I don't believe we can make a motion during lobby visitation for any kind of movement here. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I don't think we actually can.
Okay.
During
Just
lobby
wanted-
visitation, yeah, during the lobby visitation portion of the meeting, I think you're correct.
Well, I'd be
There-
perfectly happy to accept an unofficial statement that somebody will make a motion later in the meeting when you are allowed to.
I mean, it's up to the board members, and I don't know if anyone wants to make a motion at this point. We're listening to what you have to say. As you said at the beginning, the goal here was never to penalize people for installing solar. We're just trying to balance everything we have to do, be equitable to all of our customers, and trying to make sure that, and trying to look into the future. So if you're talking about hundreds or thousands of people in the community installing solar on their roof, we're trying to have a policy in place that kind of addresses that and addresses our fixed needs.
I could jump in too, Megan. I I guess a couple things on some of your statements. As far as reconsideration means a lot of different things. I know after we talked last time, or after you spoke at our previous meeting, I went back and took some notes. I took some notes during your conversation, your discussion. Went back and looked at a couple things, and I think there's 2 points that I keep coming back to. Is a lot of what you're saying really kind of focuses on the individual user in the solar case. And I really think to what Megan said, as I was thinking about it, there is a concern there. There are elements there to consider, but part of our responsibility is to the macro community and not the individuals. And that's important. I don't dissuade that. And I think there were some parts to what you were saying that I would agree with there, though I think there are elements to, as we were looking at it, that I felt maybe did not necessarily fit with kind of the macro program. And part of that is, we're going essentially from a completely I want to say use the word regulated, because I don't know that that's exactly what I mean, but we're going from the absence of any type of program to installing something. I come from an environment of continuous improvement. And to me, always the biggest jump and the biggest hurdle and the biggest resistance to any type of improvement is kind of that initial hurdle, being able to establish something and the idea that we can then make it better going forward. And I'm not necessarily surprised that there would be, difficulty with the initial program, but at the same point, I know they did. Brian is incredibly prepared, and I know you challenged some of that information, but
Yeah, I challenged all of this information.
but what I'm saying is there was always, to me, whether it was this program or it's, if you've got an alternative program, whatever, there was always going to be difficulty with that initial step. So from my point of view, I think the decision we made after going back and reconsidering it still service the larger community. And then it's something that we can then improve upon going forward.
So just to be clear, you think that buying expensive, dirty coal power at a higher price than you're willing to pay people who generate local solar power is somehow better for the community?
What I'm saying is having a program that, going from a system where it was kind of laissez-faire, there's no system around improving it and developing it going forward, going from nothing to something, I'm saying is an improvement. And then that's something that we can then improve on from there. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so are you then willing to say that you're going to make the motion to start that process, to start that reconsideration and improvement process immediately?
I'm saying that's a thing that happens over time, and I don't think it happens. I think it takes similar to your payback period for your individual solar. I think that's something that takes a long period, and that first step in order to do that is having a program to build upon. That's what I'm saying.
So a bad bureaucracy is better than no bureaucracy at all.
That's not what I'm saying, but
okay.
I'm not sure that I could convince you that's not the case.
Okay.
Joe, I just have one question for you. When did you install your system on your rooftop?
I installed my system July of 2020.
Okay. Were you familiar with the changes that were coming to this program with the interchange agreement before you installed your system?
I was not. In fact, the first mention of it to you folks came the week before my system was turned on, when it was connected up, but had not yet been, the switch hadn't been thrown yet. So I installed my whole system, and then literally that week is when Brian O'Connell came to you first with the idea that we need to start adding this monthly penalty.
And Joe, can you estimate what the cost of your installation was?
Well, the panels themselves cost $10,000
Okay.
for 6
And how many?
kilowatts.
Okay.
And you can get better buys than that. The price has continued to drop. And I had my own reasons for going with the supplier I did. So it's possible to install it for 6 kilowatts for less than that. But that's what the cost of my panels themselves were.
Okay. Do you believe, what would you estimate the annual maintenance to a system like that would cost you?
The annual maintenance is negligible. There is no annual maintenance. Once it's installed, there are no moving parts. All I have to do is make sure no ice falls on it or anything like that. So pretty much zero.
All right. Thank you, Joe, for your input and for your answering the questions. I do believe we had someone asking to comment as well from the Zoom meeting.
Hey, can everybody hear Steve and I okay? I don't know why the video's not working. Maybe it's my hotspot, but can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Can you, I guess I need for the record, can you just state your names and address?
Sure. It's Leatra Harper and Steve Janstow, 729 Pine Valley Drive here in Bowling Green.
Thank you.
Sure. First of all, the reason that we installed solar was because I have an anti-fracking nonprofit, and I wanted to get off the gas because we know a lot of people where we used to live in Southeast Ohio that's become very sick. And we see that the industry is causing a lot of harm with toxic radioactive frack waste and barging on the Ohio River, whatever. So we're fracking refugees. We came back to Bowling Green with the full intention, because we go to a meeting about fracking and they would deride us and say, well, how did you get here? And one of these days we just want to have a car that we can plug into our solar, so that when I go to one of those meetings, they can't harass me. I can just say solar. I got here on solar. So that technology is coming. But, you know, from the harms that I've seen from people that were our neighbors and where we used to live and how this industry operates. And of course, I'm not even mentioning climate change right now, and I'm a grandmother. We are just kind of having to walk our talk. And so we put on the solar panels, intending then to put in the geothermal as well, because we didn't want to have a system that was over capacity. We just wanted to get off the gas. Well, now that we have geothermal, our electrical usage has skyrocketed. So we're off the gas. Now the gas company, don't give them any ideas. They're not trying to charge us or penalize us for the fact that we're not using as much gas. I'm sure if they thought they could get away with it, they would probably try it. But in this case, as solar, we were just shocked to the allegation that we're not paying our fair share when we pay everything up front and there are no administrative overhead or maintenance costs for our solar panels. We thought we were doing the right thing. And we also, Tree City USA, we have the wind towers. My husband's a PhD expert in wind tower steel. It's just taking off. And in a lot of our circles that we are seeing that there is a much more positive embrace for what people like us are doing. So we were totally shocked that we would be penalized. And I don't want to characterize it any other way, because it is a penalty. It was something when we installed our panels, we had no idea anybody would want to charge us extra for. And it seems like we were even getting like 0.93 cents a kilowatt hour, and somehow that got reduced to 0.055. We have to go back in our records to see that, but we're certainly not being paid for the electricity that we send to the grid the way Prairie State's being paid for their coal-generated dirty power. And we're certainly not incurring any transmission costs because we are local. And so the characterization of, you know, BG, you know, the NextEra solar field, I don't know who owns the land that this is on. Like Joe said, we're talking to legal, but we have legal people volunteering to help us with this, but we don't want to go that route. I mean, it shouldn't be a legal issue. It should be, this is a moral issue. So basically, when I saw how much BG Utilities is paying the consultant to work against us, and we're doing all of this research for free, and we've been basically left out of the process because we are researchers and we do have a lot of research at our disposal, and we spend a lot of hours and nobody's paying us for those hours that we're spending to justify the reasons why we install solar and geothermal, but we're paying even more for electricity than we ever paid before. And there's a differential because we send to the grid wholesale, but we have to pay retail for what we use. We could get more batteries. We could get off the grid. There's grid deflections that are happening now because of these kinds of policies. But these kinds of policies are going in the exact wrong direction which we need to go. So if we really look at the actual cost of electricity and the actual benefit of what solar is doing, especially for the future moving forward, we could put together just a good justification that maybe we're not being compensated as much as we should be for what we're sending of clean energy to the grid. So it just depends on the angle you want to look at. And I believe Bowling Green has taken the exact wrong approach, because if you looked at it from the angle of how can we make solar work, how could we be the shining star of an example for the rest of Ohio, which is embroiled in a lot of controversy right now. And from the fracking industry, I have seen that we do have a lot of captured regulatory and elected people that are serving the utilities and are not serving the best interests of the taxpayer for the future. So this is our one chance. We don't want to get this policy implemented at all. It's just on the face of it sends the very wrong message. If somebody could actually prove to me that my locally generated clean electricity could be possibly more, needs to be somehow I have to pay more money for that, with NextEra generating, BGSU generating, with everybody else that's supposed to be doing what we're doing. If there could be actually some kind of cost, and I could amortize my capital upfront expenditures over the lifetime of my solar panels and say, here's my fixed cost for my initial investment. That's what Prairie State's doing. That's what the grid is doing. And the Biden administration says they're going to spend my tax dollars to improve the grid. So I think I'm making my fair contribution to our income tax, the city of Bowling Green, what we pay in electricity, which is a lot more than what we paid before our solar panels, and what we're paying to the state of Ohio that's not supporting the fracking industry with its externalized costs of, the environmental harms and the public health effects. I can make a pretty, and we shared with you, Joe had that radio show. We've shared with you the research. We have just as much research saying we don't have $139 an hour to pay a consultant to justify it, but we'll work on that research ourselves, and we'll give you everything you need to know to stop penalizing us for our solar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and my husband wants to say something as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leitra.
Sure.
We can't hear you if you're speaking.
Can you hear now?
Yes.
We can hear you now.
Okay. My background, when we analyzed putting in the solar, we put in 45 panels in March of 2019. We also put in 2 Tesla batteries. Before we moved to BG, we lived in Grand Rapids, Ohio, and had about 20 panels on that house in Grand Rapids, and no battery. So when we, in the area of science, and I always thought Bowling Green was about taking a step forward, a wonderful project with solar, the wind tower, which is very near and dear to me, on the metallurgical side, which we've advanced globally to offshore wind towers to keep it steel. When we put in our Tesla batteries, we were more efficient. Then we put in the Geo, and that's consuming a lot of power because of the heat exchanger. Our last couple bills were a couple $100. Our investment was $100K. So we ought to capitalize that. What example is that sending where we're connecting Geo to solar to 3 batteries? Wouldn't that emulate when Bowling Green said we want to be the hub of green energy? You've got it around the corner. So that's all I got to say. But this, and I've got all this data being a researcher to the kilowatt. So I've done an energy balance on the home usage, the solar energy from the grid to the grid by the month, incrementally showing what the usage and the savings were with just solar and 2 batteries, solar and 3 batteries, and Geo.
And just to make the point very clear, we are now, because of geothermal, paying more for electricity than we did before the solar panels were installed. So we have $100,000 capital outlay that we did because it's the right thing to do. We're never going to get a payback on this, but we certainly don't expect to be penalized for it.
And why we did this? The carbon footprint.
Yeah.
We care about our grandkids, the carbon footprint. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
other, did you want to speak this evening? Okay. Lobby visit.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit there, Megan.
I am, sorry, I was just
Yeah,
checking to see if there was anyone else here for lobby visitation. Can you hear now?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I guess moving on to utility director's report, Brian.
Before we move on, can Brian answer a few questions that I have that maybe can go along with some of the comments that were made this evening?
Sure. I'll try, Trevor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. I want to first say, I think this is important because obviously the folks that are spending time and coming in, they find it valuable and they are adding a value to our city. And I don't think that should be missed out. And I don't think that was the objective of any of our or any of our movements or any of our changes here on the board. So I wanted to say that out front. I have a question, a few for you, Brian, that I wrote down while we were talking, while our guests were talking here. When we look at retail pricing, how is that typically built out? So maybe we can just have this conversation in public here.
You talking about the electric rate schedules that we?
Yeah, so when we were measuring on the 10 cents per kilowatt that they were putting back on the system, how were we measuring that?
So if we go back in time when the first policy was created to compensate somebody, the agreement said that we would compensate them at our average wholesale power supply costs. And at that time, it was about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's what the customer was compensated for. And then over time, several contracts, power supply contracts were added to our power supply portfolio. And with those, Prairie State was one of those, the hydro was one of those, the solar power is one of those. And, Prairie State and the hydro project have a lot of debt that goes with those projects. There's a lot of debt service to pay with those projects. And so just like the wind turbines that were put in, back in 2003, 2002 timeframe, there was a lot of debt that went with those projects in the initial years. And so the cost of that power was at a higher rate during that payback time on the loan, on the borrowing. And then after the loan was paid off, that cost dropped substantially for the wind turbines. And the same logic and concept applies to our other projects that we've purchased power from. So our average wholesale power supply cost has increased up to about the 10 cents a kilowatt hour. But if you look at the market prices today that you would buy from a solar project like our NextEra solar project, the after credits, it's in the 3 to 3.5 cent range. And so that's where the reimbursement for the policy change from going from our average wholesale power supply costs to average prices that would be on the market today are reflective of what that power cost, what that value is as it is today.
So I'm hearing you right that some of the debt service is built into that rate that
That's
we were, okay. One other question is, outside of the agreement that we have, are there any other subsidies that our rooftop solar panel users receive from either the state, the federal government, or from the city?
From the city, no, nothing I'm aware of.
Okay.
From the state and federal, I don't know if there may be some tax incentive that they would get. I don't know. I know, like if you buy, say for example, a energy efficient hot water heater, if it's a heat pump water heater, or if you buy an electric vehicle, there may be a tax incentive that you would get for that. I don't know what those are though. I don't know.
Okay. And the last question I had was, since we've put this into action last year, how many applications have we received for future projects within the city of Bowling Green?
We've had 3 applications under the new policy. I think 2 of those said that they were maybe already under contract. At least one of those that said they were already under contract with the new policy. We did get one from a homeowner on John Court that just came through, and we just signed that interconnection agreement last week. They had some corrections to make on their application, had some information that didn't match what they submitted to us, so we asked them to revise that.
Okay.
And then that got updated, and so we signed that agreement. One of the other ones went online. We signed the agreement to energize the system maybe a week before that for another system.
Okay. And on average, what would you say on average in a year we would receive, say prior to 2020?
Well, prior to 2020, I mean, if you go back in history, I think we're up to about number 10 total right now. But in 2000,
and this started in 2002, early 2000s, correct?
The policy started in 2002, I think.
Okay.
But nobody implemented or used the interconnection agreement that we had in place at the time. It was basically a one-page agreement. There was no agreement to pay for anything from a customer until I think it was around 2010, maybe. And the previous the one customer that installed a wind turbine, I think they installed it around 2000 and I'll probably get this wrong, but around 2008. And then they approached the utility, maybe it was 2006. They approached the utility about compensating them for the energy that gets put back onto the grid. And so the letter agreement with that customer went to the board at the time. It was approved by the board. And again, that's where the language reflects that we would use our average wholesale power supply cost comes from. And that agreement said it had I think a 30-day termination clause from either party if we wanted to, either party wanted to cancel that. So I think in the past, again, it had the customer had to come back and ask for that policy to be renewed. When I got here, we did that one time. And I think the second time I just suggested that we make it an annual renewal. And so the customer didn't have to keep coming back and asking for that credit. And so, again, we go through and do an annual calculation. We'd give that information to the customer, and that credit would get put on the customer's power supply bill from the utility or the customer's utility bill.
Is that process similar to net metering?
Net metering has a lot of different connotations. I would say I call it bidirectional metering.
Okay.
And so in the case going back to the 20 and 10 agreement, I would say that was bidirectional, and that the customer paid retail price for the energy that they used, and they were compensated at our average wholesale power supply cost for what they delivered to us. Some people use the term net metering, where you're going to take the kilowatt hours the customer uses, and you're going to subtract the kilowatt hours that they delivered to the utility. And in that case, the customer basically is getting the retail rate or the retail credit for that energy. And that value is too high because that retail rate covers all of our expenses to maintain and operate the system. And so that's why I don't use the term net metering. Other utilities have used that as an option. We didn't recommend that because, again, our point is to try to be fair to all customers. And if you give the retail credit to those solar generating customers, you're essentially subsidizing those customers. And the state of Hawaii did that exact thing and ended up with 51%, if my number's right. A large percentage of their population did rooftop solar and had net metering. And then they got to a point where they had more people with solar than they had without. And so now you have a subsidized situation that just doesn't work very well.
Okay. In my own research, I had seen that term, and I wanted to make sure that I had some clarification on that as well. And I believe Leatra and her husband have they put a few comments in our chat here for us. Thank you, Brian.
Sure, thank you. guess the first one's for you, Megan. I don't know.
I can't see it.
The first comment says, can Steve and I make some comments now?
Yeah, I think that was
Okay.
when,
What does BG pay for peak power, which is when our panels function the best? So if you look at our AMP power supply bill, they have an on-peak and off-peak energy rate that basically comes from the market, and that cost varies between 2.5 cents and 4.5 cents. Depends on the month, depends on the time of year. That's even during the summertime. And so on-peak power, years ago, there was a difference in cost between on-peak and off-peak energy costs. That is not so much the case of what we're seeing today. The second comment was, we generate electricity for everyone to use, and we pay retail along with everyone else, and also provide revenue, and also provide revenue for the differential between the wholesale price we are given and the retail price we pay. What does BG pay for the coal-fired kilowatt hour? Again, that's in our power supply costs. And so if you are just talking about kilowatt hours, the cost of that energy is very low because most of the costs of that project are in debt service and not in the energy kilowatt hour for what they actually generate and deliver to us. So if you look at the average, I think we're probably around 5.5 cents to 6.5 cents roughly. Again, I don't have the bill in front of me to give you the number, but those costs are on our power supply bill. And if you looked at the total dollars spent and the total kilowatt hours delivered, you would divide those two numbers and you could say, well, that's the average price of that power supply. But I'm sorry, I don't have that right now with me.
I think the last thing I would say on this topic is BG has had a continued investment in renewables. I've been in this town for 19 years, and we are leagues away of our competitors or other towns around us. And that's not saying that we don't have opportunities here, but I do want to make sure that we are not foregoing that. And the other thing is our energy prices are what we use to attract our larger businesses. And I did see Katie Thompson get on here, and I would say that she would say that's very valuable in how we go about things and how we attract businesses to our city. And so I think there's a multifacet here that we need to take into consideration. And I do believe that the board looked at all of those when making this decision.
and thank you for elaborating on that. Any other board member questions before we move on to Brian's report? Okay.
Okay. If there are other questions, I mean, please feel free to send them to me, and I'll be happy to get back to you with an answer. Well, the first item on our agenda today here that I have is a wastewater refund needing a supplemental appropriation. And just to give you some background, the board packet has this in the write-up, but as far as wastewater charges go, we do have an extra charge called an extra strength surcharge. And what we typically bill customers for is what we call normal concentrations of waste. That includes for biological oxygen demand, suspended solids, phosphorus, and grease. This is in the ordinance sections as well. That's in section 50.11. Section 50.12 outlines what options we have if we have a customer who exceeds those normal concentrations, and one is to prohibit the discharge. The second option is to allow the customer to perform pre-treatment prior to sending us the discharge, which would get them into the normal concentration category. And then the third option was we can permit the discharge if it won't have any adverse impacts on the wastewater plant or the collection system. But then we bill them for what's called an extra strength concentration or an extra strength surcharge. Ordinance section 50.16 identifies the process to calculate that extra strength surcharge. And so Phoenix Technologies is a local manufacturer. In 2016, we talked to them about their extra strength concentration or their above normal concentration for suspended solids. Again, going back to ordinance 50.11. And we gave them the option of saying, well, you can either pre-treat this wastewater, this waste stream, or if we have to deal with it, then we're going to have to bill you for this extra strength surcharge. Phoenix elected to pay the extra strength surcharge at that time, and so the charge was implemented on a monthly basis, and they've been paying that since 2016. We recently had another industrial customer that came forward, and the information and the data they were giving to us alluded to that they were also going to have an extra strength surcharge, and so we've been talking with them about that. And as we reviewed the ordinance, we realized that we have been overbilling Phoenix since 2016, and the total amount of that overbilling to date is $235,000 and some change. So it's a substantial amount. So to address the error, I sat down with Doug Clark and Jackie Spangenberg. We looked at the ordinance and how the ordinance read and where we erred in our calculation. We got to where everybody could agree on the interpretation of the ordinance and the surcharge, and then we calculated it based off of what the ordinance says, going back to the 2016 billings to calculate that $235,000 overbilling. Doug Clark and I went out and we met with Phoenix and their management staff to explain the error and provide them with information on the overbilling. Going back to 2016, we give them all of our actual billings and the corrected billings. We suggested some options on how we could return those funds to Phoenix. They came back with a few comments, and so we did work out an agreement that I put in your board packet. But mainly, there's three main things that come out of this. The city would issue a payment to Phoenix Technologies for $35,000, which would leave a balance of $200,000 and some change. The city would put a credit of the $200,000 that's remaining on Phoenix's extra strength surcharge. And then that credit will be reduced each month as we bill them for that extra strength surcharge over the next potentially 19 months into 2022. And then Phoenix requested that we make sure that this overcharge or this credit is eliminated prior to the end of 2022. And so that would mean that if there is a remaining credit that as of November 1st of 22, then we would issue payment before the end of 22 occurs to get it off the books. Obviously, we don't typically anticipate that much of a refund to go back on the wastewater side or in any of the funds. So we're requesting an unappropriated supplemental of $35,000 to go into the refunds line item. We don't know for sure what the payment would be in November of 22 because that will depend on the amount of their extra strength surcharge billings over the next 19 months. If you use their 2020 billings, the reimbursement will take about 16 months to complete. During that time, Phoenix may elect to put in pretreatment or change some part of their process that could reduce their extra strength surcharge, and that would maybe end up with a reason why you'd maybe have a balance at the, towards the end of 22 that we would have to pay. So the 22 budget will have to allow for that potential payment. And again, we'll be working with Phoenix and talking with them about what their plans are for that potential pretreatment. And if I would think, they're going to have to buy equipment to make that happen, get it installed, get it started up. That would take time. I think they would need to have that in their 22 budget as well. So I think towards the end of 21, we'll be talking with them. We'll know, I believe, what what their plans are for 22 and how they're going to proceed. And then two, we can use 21 here, the rest of this year as a baseline to say, are they still on track with that same usage or not? And that'll give us a better ballpark as well for any payments that would occur in 22. This obviously has an impact on the wastewater funds. And if you go back and look at your budget information, at the end of this year, so December 31st of 21, we had estimated a fund balance of $2.7 million. And so if you add up Phoenix's 2020 billings at $150,000 plus this $35,000 payment, that's a $185,000 deduction to the budget. And so that $2.7 million fund balance goes down to $2.5 million. I would say that we will be looking the rest of this year to find ways where we can reduce wastewater expenses. Wastewater typically is pretty tight on their budgets anyways. And so to find operating expenses where we can reduce them to that level is probably going to be difficult. I've also asked Doug Clark to go back and review the ordinance. I gave you a copy of the ordinance, and if you look at it, you'll see that section 50.16 is difficult to interpret at best. And part of the reason for the error is we never had a customer that had an extra strength surcharge billing prior to 2016, at least none of the current staff can recall. And there were didn't have any records of that. So it was a little bit in the interpretation of 50.16 as to where the error occurred. So I've asked staff to go back and look at that ordinance, try to figure out, is there a way we can make this a little bit easier to interpret going forward? Also to have them look at our current expenses and say, does our current cost for treating wastewater reflect this extra strength surcharge and what we're billing for? Because these charges were in this rate structure calculation was put into place, many years ago, and I don't know that it's reflective of what our current expenses are for actual treatment of wastewater as they are today. So we're going to be looking at that over the next several months, and if we have any recommended changes, we would come back to the board and present you with that information and talk more about it at that time. But to get the agreement signed with Phoenix, I told them that this would require the supplemental appropriation that had to have Board of Utilities approval as well as City Council's approval. And so that's what I'm here to ask for today.
So you're comfortable, you've got it all figured out now as far as moving forward with other customers? I mean, as far as how that would be calculated and.
Yeah. It's but the ordinance has a number in it, and it says, just to point you to where we made our mistake. It says in 1,000 cubic feet times 0.06238. And so back in 2016, when we read that, we thought, well, that's the rate that we're to bill for. But that's actually a conversion factor between milligrams per liter and pounds per cubic foot. So when we realized that, okay, well, that's not right. Where does the actual dollars and cents come into play? And that's in the previous description. It talks about, if I can find it. It talks about the expenses of treating the wastewater. And so basically we went and we said, well, what was our budgets for that year? So we went back and we got the 2016 budgets, this 2017 budgets, and we used that expense information to calculate, what the charge should be.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a couple questions on my end. I was going to ask if, what we had done to correct, and you've already kind of answered that question. I guess two questions I have. You mentioned, you found the error. One of the things that it talks about in here is just there's a lot of estimations as far as estimation total pounds of BOD, suspended solids, et cetera. Can you speak a little bit to just the process for determining those concentrations for those customers? It mentions a lot, average concentration. Is that something that's constantly being monitored, or is that being off of sampling, or can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can. So that's done off of sampling from the customer. And so they're giving us information and data off of their wastewater discharges for that month. And that's how we determine what that billing is. There have been times where it's been exceptionally high, for example, and we look at that and we say, well, that's an anomaly. So we go back and ask them, well, did something occur? And they may say, well, yeah, we had, that was a day we were cleaning out a tank or something, and we had an extra high report on a number, but that wasn't typical for the month. And so we've worked with them to figure out, well, what should the number be? And so it's based off of the data that they send to us as part of their pretreatment requirement. And that's information that goes to Doug. Our cost information and how many pounds of, say, BOD or suspended solids we get, again, that comes from Doug as well. That goes into the calculation.
Okay. One last question then for me. You mentioned a little bit the impact on the budget. Do you anticipate there being any issue, not only, obviously we now have some outlay as far as the correction goes, but also now there's this absence of what seemed to be a pretty regular occurrence for income. I was going back into the budget. I hadn't necessarily found it yet, but I wasn't sure if that was really all supplemental, or if that was something that we're now going to be missing that had been kind of accounted for previously.
So that was in our budget for the revenue projections. And that's why I say that would be an impact of the $185,000 in this year's budget, because those revenues are going to stop. And actually, if you go look at the information that I gave you a couple of tables in there from 2016 through 21, and you'll note if the turn to the table, it says 2021 water pollution control extra strength surcharge. It has the months of January and February there, and there's what I'm showing as an underpayment of $14,000 for January and $6,000 for February. So those are months that we didn't we did not bill them, or they didn't pay, because we're trying to work out this situation. And so we've basically told them for this, up to this point, just don't pay us anything else for these billings. We'll keep tracking it. We'll deduct that off of the totals. And so I know it's kind of hard to read them. I apologize for the fuzziness, but if you go to the next page, I put the page numbers on your board packet, page 18. It summarizes all the tables, and then at the bottom left is the summary for all those years. And if you add up the previous years that had overbilling, and then the credits that were basically issued in 21 because we haven't charged them for that, that's how you get the $235,000. Is that right? The number? Yeah, 235,000.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Anything else? Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
make a motion to approve resolution 042021-01, authorizing a supplemental appropriation for a wastewater refund.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It's approved.
Okay, thank you. I know Phoenix was waiting for us to get back with them. So once City Council gets through their process, then we'll get that addressed with them as well. The next item is a request to do some roof replacement work out at the water pollution control facility. And just to start, I know I just said in the last item that we would try to find ways to reduce wastewater expenses. And you might say, well, why are you coming now to replace a roof, which is a wastewater expense, when you just said you're going to try to reduce expenses? And the reason for that is that the previous discussion was about operating revenues and wastewater charges. And this project is funded out of the Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund, which is part of the income tax and has nothing to do with the operating expenses. So we can't take Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund dollars and transfer that to operating lines to cover losses or cover expenses in that category. Reducing this project or changing this project would have no impact on the Phoenix extra strength surcharge billings. So I guess before I get into too much more detail, I just wanted to make that statement that this project is funded with different dollars that can't be used for correcting the previous item that the board addressed. But essentially, what we're asking for is to replace the roof at the administration building. It's had leaks over the years. It's an older EPDM roof, rubber membrane roof. And we had it in last year's budget and planned to do it in last year's budget. But due to the COVID impacts with businesses shutting down, not sure what was going to happen with the income tax collections, we tried to find projects that we could hold off last year. This was one of those projects. We'd like to move forward and get the roof replaced and get the water issues addressed. What the request is for is to advertise for bids to do the project, or to use a governmental purchasing contract that's available to us. We used to use the state of Ohio purchasing program for roof replacements. The state no longer has a roof replacement contract under their state governmental purchasing, but there are other governmental purchasing options available. And one of those that we have used for roof replacements is called the Interlocal Purchasing System, and it's called TIPS. And so TIPS has a roofing contractor that we have used in the past, again, on many roofs, whether it's from the police department to roofs out at the water treatment plant, the electric division building. Others have utilized this program. It's a PVC membrane roofing system from Duralast. That's who has the current contract through TIPS. They offer a 15-year warranty with 100% guarantee on labor and materials. Our 21 budget included $71,100 for the roof replacement at the administration building. The 21 pricing, again, that number was based off of the 2020 contract. The 21 TIPS pricing for this work came in just under $74,000, so a couple $1,000 above what our budget had in there. But we do have funds available that can cover the difference. And then again, in the memo I wrote up about the use of the funds from the 4017 Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund versus the income tax versus operating funds. So I covered that already. But we'd like to get the roof replaced this year and before the weather goes bad.
Questions? Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
move to approve resolution 04-202102, authorizing the utilities director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract or participate in the interlocal purchasing system for roof replacement at the water pollution control facility.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Approved.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item is a request to upgrade some existing electric substation network monitoring communication equipment. This would be at their electric division building and at all of the electric substations eventually, But what we're talking about right now is for 21, the project entails the electric division building and the substation on West Gypsy Lane Road, which is just west of the Walmart store by Maple Street. But the current equipment that we have in our substations is 20 to 30 years old, and this is electrical communication equipment, and in the life of that, it has basically reached the end of its useful life. We can't get certain data out of it. We have limitations on what we can connect to our current SCADA system to pull information from the substations and see what's occurring. And so Steve Schaefer is here. He put together a fairly detailed report, which I included in your packet if you wanted to see, all the nuts and bolts that go into what it is they're proposing. But I'll try to go through it with you real quickly and high level. If you have more detailed questions, I'll try to answer those. But if not, Steve is here to help us out. The total project, again, we're expecting the total project to take 2 or 3 years. We'd like to start at the electric division building and at the Gypsy substation. To get this new system to communicate with all the substations and with our current electric building, we do have to hang new fiber around the city and connect them with new fiber. We are doing that today. We can't use the old system or the old fiber because it's already being occupied and used by the current communication system or other utility communication needs. And so that's why we're putting up new fiber to get that in place. And we can't take the old communication system down until the new system is in place. Once the new system is in place, we can decommission the old communication equipment, and those fiber lines that are up there today can be repurposed for something else. So there won't be any loss on the fiber side as far as capabilities. We have standardized our substation equipment in some cases, such as relays and the satellite clocks, to a company called Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, and I'll use SEL for short. And so what we're recommending is that we use SEL equipment for monitoring and network communications equipment for these proposed upgrades. And this new equipment will allow us to have full alarm monitoring. And so right now, if we get an alarm at a substation, the information we can get back is very limited. We see there's an alarm, the substation may have tripped out, but we don't know what happened. So we have to go to the substation and physically see, what's occurring, what is the status of the breakers, the relays, and then troubleshoot the problem from there. This new communication equipment will give us that information on our phones, basically, because it does have a web-based application that we can utilize. Also, if you're at any of the other substations, or if you're back at the electric division building, you'll be able to see the exact reason that something happened or what breaker may be tripped. You'll be able to get data from the transformers. Metering data will also be able to be pulled from the system. It'll include new alarm panels and new touch screens that will allow staff to access the data, which we don't have that right now. I mentioned the web-based remote monitoring, so that if a technician is on call and there's a outage reported or there's an alarm, the technicians will be able to see the information on their phone. There is obviously concerns whenever you get into networks with cybersecurity, and so this equipment does have improved cybersecurity enhancements that we don't have today. Not that we're at risk of being hacked or anything, so I don't want you to think that. It will tie into our SCADA system, our AMR system, our automated metering system. Will be able to utilize this system as well, including security cameras that we have at some of our substations. Right now, we can't use our current communication equipment or network equipment to connect those because there's not enough bandwidth with that current equipment. So to start the project, again, we wanted to work at the electric division building on East Wooster Street and at the Gypsy Lane substation number 3. We did include $150,000 in the 21 budget for this work. it was lumped in with a bunch of other projects. And so I think the total was like $650,000 for all of that. But this portion was around 150. We estimate that the future substation work and those upgrades over the next 2 to 3 years would cost approximately $420,000. So we have a long ways to go yet. But this will get us a good start. SEL, basically they're the only vendor for their equipment. And so they provide us with a quote of $69,000 for that equipment. But they also provide engineering services to utilize their equipment. And they gave us a quote for that work at $76,000. I will say it's not typical that we direct contract with a vendor and an engineering firm that supplies, both services. But that's because we're doing more typical construction projects. And if you're in the electrical realm, it's not uncommon that a communication or an electrical supplier or a vendor of equipment would also supply or provide engineering services along with their products, because they obviously want you to be able to use those and design those and troubleshoot those and commission those successfully. So they do offer both services. And again, we don't typically do that, but I believe in this case that the single source vendor is justified, given that we're trying to standardize on equipment to be identical in all of the substations, and having that uniformity from one substation to the next will be a help to staff and maintaining the system and making sure all of the communication works together. Additionally, if we had asked for funding for the entire project and we had gone to the SEL, we'd likely be buying all of the equipment at once up front and doing all the work, under one contract. We're talking now about, doing this over a 2 or 3 year period of time. And part of that is because our electric division staff will be the ones to install and wire the new equipment, but also decommission the old equipment. We've got the capability of doing that in-house, and so we would like to do that work with our own staff. That alleviates the need to hire a contractor then to perform that wiring and construction work. So I'm asking or requesting the board approve two resolutions. 04-2021-03 authorizes the purchase of the SCL equipment. And then for the second resolution, I've given you two options. The first one, -04, is to contract with SCL for the engineering services. However, I know that it's odd that we would use one company for both equipment and engineering services. So -05 resolution was put together that we would follow our qualifications-based engineering selection that we've used in the past, if the board is more comfortable with that. And we would put it out for bid for the engineering services to hire whoever was the most qualified company to provide that engineering service. Obviously, SEL would be able to respond to that or to submit for that. And we would have to go through and score each of the companies that submitted a qualification accordingly. And with that system, whoever gets the most points, they would then be negotiated with the contract for the engineering services. Obviously, SEL probably has a good chance of receiving that award because it's their equipment. They're probably the most likely to be one of the most qualified to design and do work around their equipment. But I don't know that. I mean, there could be other companies out there that might be able to provide better service than what SEL can provide. So again, for the engineering, I think we have two options. Again, the first one was to go to SEL directly. The second one was to use our qualifications-based criteria. And again, for engineering services, we can't base it off of cost, or we can't, while SEL did give us a quote for their engineering services, I can't go to another company and ask them for a price and then compare the two and take the lowest and best, because the state of Ohio requires that governments hire engineering services based off of qualifications and not based off of a price. So I have to pick that company based on qualifications and not, just because somebody came in, $5,000 lower off of a quote.
Brian, if we go with option 2 and ask for quotes from other engineering places, how far is that going to push the timeline off of what where you need to be to have this happen in the time frame we need it to happen? I mean, how much time is that going to take?
Yeah, so I don't think that it's going to delay us greatly on the project. If we can get the purchase order issued to SEL for the equipment, that's probably stuff that's not sitting on their shelf that they would have to get manufactured and then get shipped to us. But time wise, these ordinances will these resolutions will then go to council for them to consider an ordinance to be approved. So that process is going to be the same for the purchase of the equipment as well as the engineering services. So that's probably a 3 to 3.5 month window. We can, if the qualifications option is opted to by the board, we can put together the information and the documents that we need to advertise the qualifications prior to the ordinance being finalized. We can advertise that prior to the ordinance being finalized. We can go through and score those qualifications prior to the ordinance being finalized. And then the only thing that I can't do is I can't sign a contract with an engineering company prior to the ordinance being finalized. So we can do a lot of that work up front and get the engineering firm selected. So I don't think it's going to cause a great delay because I wasn't anticipating requesting any expedited readings or emergency clauses through city council. So I don't think it's a problem either way it goes. It may add a month to the schedule, if that, but I think we'll be okay either way.
All right. But your preference would be to go the route of just going with SEL right off the bat.
That's our suggestion. And again, mainly because it's their equipment. If you hired another company to do, they say GE makes a lot of electrical equipment. If you bought GE products, they have engineering services that you can hire to implement and roll out their equipment. And so, they've got that service they would provide. Again, I think SEL is probably going to be, highly qualified to implement and design a project around their equipment. But I can't say for sure that you couldn't get somebody else that would have just as much, if not more, experience with their equipment than what they would have.
Okay. Thanks.
Brian, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Andy.
Just a quick couple questions, Brian. One, as far as SEL services, either for the equipment or for the engineering services, are they providing, I know you said our people were going to do the install, but are they providing support through the install or just the design phase?
So they would do through the commissioning and the startup.
Okay.
And some training on their equipment. Steve, was that?
Okay. And I guess kind of a secondary question then, the impression that I'm getting, I guess, are there alternatives to SEL? I mean, it seems like that's kind of I didn't really see anything in here as far as other evaluations. I'm assuming those took place, but, or is SEL really the biggest game in town here?
Yeah, so there are other manufacturers. GE has other products that are probably similar to SEL. I think in the electric substation world, SEL is probably the, if you want to use the term Cadillac, if you want the the high level or the top performer. That's probably SEL, and maybe, and Steve, I don't know if you can address that at all. Step up.
Yeah, we are typically use Schweitzer in all of substations for the breaker protection equipment. And the one nice thing about this proposal is it will easily interface with all our relaying equipment. If we look at GE or another brand of hardware, then there's going to be some issues with interfacing it. And like Brian said, Schweitzer is probably one of the biggest players in the substation industry as far as equipment. It would probably be best to go with their engineering firms because it is their equipment. They know all the ins and outs and how it all interfaces. And like Brian said, there is other engineering firms that you could use, but they would be buying the Schweitzer product and then designing it, engineering it, and hopefully would go down the same path that we have laid out here in this design. So we've already got some time and conversations in with Schweitzer on how we want it to all work. So there'll be a little time lost with that.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
Certainly.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move we approve authorizing the Utilities Director to enter into contracts with Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories for electric substation communication equipment, which is Resolution 04-2021-03.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I would just bring up on a discussion point, I agree, but I think if I'd be leaning towards the just running with them as the engineering piece. I know that'll probably be our next proposal here, but just throwing that out there.
I agree, Andy. The feedback from Steve was good there. I appreciate that.
Did I have a second? I lost track.
I think Trevor's.
Yep. Second.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. If that's approved,
Madam Chair,
yes.
move to approve resolution 04-2021-04, authorizing the utilities director to enter into a contract with SEL for engineering services related to electric substation communication equipment.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion about this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Resolution's approved.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next item is to request some upgrades and changes on our meter reading system. And right now, we currently use a company called Aclara, and we use a power line carrier system. And this is for the bulk of our customers that are either electric only customers or they have both electric and water. Right now, if we have a customer has both electric and water, the water meter is by Badger, and there's a transponder or a communication device that is put on that meter, and it sends its meter data wirelessly to the electric meter. But in the electric meter, we have to install an RF board or a radio frequency board that picks up that signal. And then the electric meter transmits the data for both the water and the electric over the power line and back to our substation. And then we pick it up at the substation and get it to this office and to our billing software. So that's how the majority of our customers' meters are read. Both water and electric is over the power lines. For customers that are water only and that maybe don't have access to an electric meter, and examples of those would be customers that are beyond the city limits that are our retail customers, but also the Village of Haskins, based on our contract signed, a couple of decades ago. We take care of their meter reading system for the Village of Haskins, and those systems are not on our power line carrier system to Aclara. And so instead we have a system from Badger, which is again the manufacturer of the water meter. And we do drive-by reads once a month, roughly. We pull those reads off of the unit as we drive by. We bring the unit back to the billing office, and that data gets dumped into the billing system. And that's how those customers are billed if they're a water only customer, or there's no electric meter nearby that they can access or we can use. This has worked well for us over the past 10 years, but two major issues really have come up that we can't get around. And again, this project was really planned to be rolled out last year, but due to COVID, we're trying to find ways to again reduce expenses, and so this is one of the projects that was moved into 21 and not performed last year. But the two major issues we have right now, the first one I outlined for you in your board packet, but the RF board that gets installed in the electric meter is no longer being manufactured, and so we did, when we heard this news a couple years ago, we did buy as many RF boards, receiver boards as possible that we could get our hands on. I think we even bought some used equipment from other utilities that were abandoning their power line carrier system because they were upgrading their metering infrastructure to something else. They had Aclara previously, and so we tried to go out and get as many of those as we could, but those RF boards are no longer available to purchase. And so what that means is that as we get new customers or as those RF boards fail and we have to replace those, we won't be able to read the water meter to the electric meter, or they won't be able to communicate any longer. The second problem we have is that Badger has changed their metering system as well, and they've basically outdated, or they've stopped supporting the software that we use to read the water meters with their system. And so we no longer have a maintenance contract for support. And at some point with software upgrades with other systems, it's likely that is also going to stop functioning. And if we have a problem with it, we'll have nobody to call and help us work out that problem. So all of the problems that we have, the two problems really are revolved around reading water meters, and don't revolve around the electric meter reading as a problem. So we don't see a need to scrap everything and rebuild all of the infrastructure for electric meters and water meters. We just wanted to focus on water meters, and Aclara does offer an RF wireless meter reading system. And I know I mentioned RF before, but this is, I would say that the RF system we had before was a micro scale, so to speak. And what I'm going to talk to you about is a macro scale, or a much larger wireless coverage system. So with the Aclara RF system, basically we would get several advantages. Number one is we already use Aclara power line carrier system to read electric meters, and that doesn't require any change to keep using that system through Aclara. The Aclara RF system can read both water and electric meters. And so there are some electric meters that are on our larger customers' accounts, and those are read manually. But with this RF system, we will be able to modify or renovate or replace those meters and read those off of the RF, the Aclara RF system. And so we would no longer physically have to go to that customer's meter, read the information, and then input that data into our meter reading system. The billing software we use is called Aclara One, and that meter reading software will incorporate both RF reads through the Aclara RF, as well as the power line carrier reads. It doesn't distinguish between those two systems. It will, as far as staff goes, it will look as if it's all one meter reading system. And we already use the Aclara One software today. So, training for new staff on updated software will be very limited on how to use the Aclara RF system. We can keep using the Badger water meter that's currently installed at the customer's property. We don't have to physically change the meter itself, but we will have to purchase and install what's called a meter transmission unit, or an MTU. And that basically replaces the head on the water meter. So right now we have a device that transmits data to the electric meter, and that will have to be replaced with this new MTU that will communicate to a different RF antenna that's I'll talk to you about a little bit later here. But the meter itself, the Badger meter itself, does not need change, so we can salvage that. The Aclara RF system is independent of the power line carrier system, and so right now when we hook up a water meter, we have to send out. The electric division has a staff member that goes out with the water division, because the electric meter has to be able to talk to the water meter. And because we have staff that does water and staff that does electric, we have to make sure that that water meter is talking to the right electric meter. And so that requires them both to coordinate and go out and work together to make sure that those devices communicate. With this new RF system, water and electric will basically be separated. We won't have to have any connection or interconnection between the electric meter and the water meter. And the water guys can go out and do their business on the water meter and get it communicating on the new system on their own. And electric can continue to use the power line carrier system. And again, no change to their process. We can keep using the Badger system while this new Aclara RF system is being installed, tested, and started up. After the Aclara RF system is ready, then we can start to convert customers over to the Aclara RF system. We won't lose any water reads. We can continue our process with the Badger system as long as it's still functioning, up until all those customers are off of the Badger system and on the new Aclara system. Number 7 in your list here I think is an important one. And that is that if water customers that currently use the Badger meter reading system right now, they don't have access to the Aclara Utility Insights software that we have on our website that customers can use to access their utility data. So on that Utility Insights software, they can see their electric usage, their water usage. It compares previous years as well as temperature, and they can get a lot of information and updates or suggestions about how to improve their water usage or reduce their water usage, or if there's even spikes in their usage for whatever reason, it can alert them to that as well. With the Aclara RF system, all of our customers will be able to use that Utility Insights software. So anybody who is inside the city, whether you're on power line carrier or you're on the RF system, you'll be able to see that. If you're in Haskins right now, like for example, you can't use that information, that software, because you're not on the Aclara meter reading system. But with the Aclara RF system, you'll be able to see that. This will also reduce the amount of upfront capital investment that we need to pay at this time. We'll be able to continue to utilize our past investments in meter reading equipment. And then over time, as either technology changes or as we convert customers from the older Badger system to Aclara RF system, again, we'll be able to budget for that over a period of time versus a large upfront capital expense, all at once. There's a lot of backups and redundancies in the Aclara system, so they have antennas basically that will cover each customer, multiple antennas that will cover each customer. So the chances of missing data or a read point is very, very low. The equipment also stores, I forget how many days, but it's several days worth of data. And I think it also does like hourly reads. So if there's ever a point where for some reason a meter doesn't read, that data is not lost. It's all saved again for several days. So they've built in a lot of again, backups and redundancies to decrease lost data or to increase reliability. And the Aclara RF system also has some opportunities that we don't have today, and that is they have some options for leak detection, water pressure monitoring, sewer monitoring that we don't have today. And again, you just have to buy a device that can communicate on this new RF system that, again, we've not looked at that heavily, and that's not like a big selling point, but those are things that are a possibility. So to build out the Aclara RF system, we got a couple things to install. Aclara has given us some information on where these data collection units or these DCUs would be located. We need about 6 of these from their information to install in the system. And that would cover, again, all of the city of Bowling Green, and then going to the north up to the village of Haskins. They've given us, again, locations of where antennas could be. We believe 3 of those could be on our water towers. So again, we own those sites. We have fiber to those sites now. 3 of the other 3 would be located on a utility pole, maybe a 50 or 60 foot tall pole someplace out in the system. They're operated connection wise. They can communicate with us over fiber, Wi-Fi, or cellular, so we can get the backhaul data from those DCUs from multiple options. We can use cellular up front if we don't have fiber or Wi-Fi in the area. But if we ever wanted to get rid of that cellular connection, we could build fiber to the unit and communicate with it that way. After we get the DCUs installed or the data collection units, the next step would be to install the MTUs, which I talked about previously, actually at the customer's property. Again, the MTU would then transmit the data to the DCU, and that's where we would read these meters through again a larger RF system. We would need about 600 of the MTUs initially to convert our water customers that are currently read through the Badger system over to the Aclara RF system. Obviously, we have a lot more water customers than that, so that just covers the ones that are currently, again, on the Badger system. And again, over time, if you wanted to convert those customers from Badger to the Aclara system, or we see a problem with the Badger system coming up, we can budget and plan for that accordingly. We did look at other meter reading options in Badger, since they have, we buy all of our water meters from Badger. We did look at them as a possibility, and they have similar offerings as Aclara. They have an RF system, they have a cellular-based system, but staff looked at it. We don't recommend using the Badger system, and I gave you, again, 4 reasons here. But Aclara basically offers one meter reading system for electric and water, which is what we have now for the most part. That reduces complexity and potential problems for staff. The Utility Insights software I mentioned previously is not compatible with a Badger meter reading system that they've provided to us or given us as an option. We would have to purchase the Badger water data analysis software for customers to see their daily usage and their comparison information, whereas Aclara offers that software available to all Aclara customers. And we'd have one software option to direct customers to. If you go with Badger, you could have a customer that was on the Utility Insights for their electric usage, and they could get information out of that for electric, but then they're going to have to go to another website for their water usage, their water data. And that to me seems very confusing to a customer to say, well, some of you can get all that data from Aclara. Some of you can get it from Aclara and some from Badger. Eventually, as with all things technology driven, those RF boards and those electric meters are all going to fail. And so all water customers, I can see at some point, will be converted to some other system besides the power line carrier system. And that likely would be the RF system that we're proposing today. So having all those customers on one software, having all of our meter reading software on one through Aclara would decrease customer confusion as well as staff's need to learn new things or to implement different software packages. If we use the Badger cellular option, we do run the risk of having to upgrade all of the water meters if the cellular option and that service is ever eliminated. So as you see, we used to be 4G, now it's 5G. If they're operating at let's just say the 2G level or whatever was before 4G, at some point those cellular companies do tend to stop offering that service, or they upgrade their towers where that's no longer an option. And so you're basically tied to paying a cellular connection fee for all of your water meters, as well as potentially upgrading your meter heads on the water side if that cellular path ever goes down or ever is replaced or outdated. Again, with the Aclara option, we do have a need for a cellular backhaul connection, but those are only potentially 3 antenna or points to worry about. And we can also install fiber to those points and get that information back over a fiber that we would build. And again, the Badger option, as I mentioned before, the Badger option does not read electric meters, whereas the Aclara RF system does read electric meters. And so if we wanted to, convert those larger customers from manual reads to a wireless or a remote read, Badger just does not give us that capability. So, we believe that the Aclara system offers the most flexibility. We did budget $221,000 in this year's budget for the project. Funds were split between 50-50 between the Water Capital Reserve Fund and the Sewer Capital Reserve Fund. And that's because while we read water meters, the sewer charges are based on the water usage information, as well as the sewer capacity charge. So that's why the funds were split 50-50 between water and sewer. I talked before about, this was in the 2020 budget, but we delayed it because of COVID. We haven't gotten an updated cost from Aclara yet, based off of last year's budget. They were supposed to get it to us last week, but they were delayed with people being out of the office. So we do expect to see that information this week. What I would say is if the costs should be higher than what the budget has allocated, we could still continue with the bulk of the project and getting the DCUs installed, getting that connectivity started up. And then because we had, say, 600 MTUs to install, we could adjust that number down from 600 roughly to maybe it's 500 or so, or 400 MTUs to stay within the budget for the year. If things changed, again, we probably need a supplemental appropriation at a future board meeting, because there are not too many other projects that are funded out of that budget line item. But that would be the plan for the rest of this year, would be try to stay within that budget line, and then plan for the remainder of those expenses in the 22 budget. And that's all I have for you on that item.
Questions for Brian?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
move to approve resolution 04202106, authorizing the utilities director to enter into contracts with Aclara for meter reading equipment and services.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Resolution's approved.
Great, thank you. The only other item I have for you is just want to update you about two awards that the electric division received from the American Public Power Association. One of those is our RP3 award, and that's a reliable public power provider. And we've had that designation since 2011. It's a multi-year award that we've received. But this year was special in that we did achieve the they call it the diamond level, or the highest level. So you have to get a 98% or a 100%, 98 to 100% to be at the diamond level. We've had, whatever what was below that. I think it was platinum was below that, or gold or something. But we've never quite achieved the diamond level. So John Stewart and Diane Hillier at the electric division spent a lot of time this past year to prepare the information and look at past applications and scorings that the division got feedback from APPA on where we were maybe deficient in some categories or some areas, and they really spent a lot of time to try to address those and make sure they were part of our application for this past year. So not everybody gets to that level. It's a high bar to cross, and it is a nationwide benchmark for our utility to say, we're covering things like safety, reliability, system improvements, and employee training. It covers those 4 categories, and that, basically comparing yourselves to the industry, you're checking all the boxes and doing the right thing. So I really want to appreciate their efforts to make that happen. That is not an easy achievement, and it's a lot of work went into that. Now the flip side of that is now, we don't just say, well, we're done now. Obviously we have to continue that, and that has to keep going forward. So we'll keep working on that. The second one was also from APPA, but it was a certificate of excellence and reliability. And we've had that in past years as well. And essentially we submit our outage data to APPA or through their software that a lot of utilities across the country use. And if your outages are in the top 25% of top quartile, then you get the certificate of reliability as, again, another benchmark to show where you stand amongst other comparative utilities. And we were in that top quartile. So for reliability, again, similar to RP3, but also a little bit different. Again, just that one goes out to, and it's not just John and Diane and the putting the applications together for this kind of stuff, but everybody in the electric division, Steve including, plus all of his coworkers. They just do a lot of work and a lot of effort to make sure that things go right. And I appreciate all of their time and effort on that. So
No, we appreciate it too, and it's nice to see them get recognized that way. So
Yeah,
thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
the only thing I would comment on the agenda is, if you know at the bottom, there was a request for an executive session to talk about personnel issues. And that's all I have, unless you have other questions for me.
Questions? Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Cover reports there. Official reports. Joe? Council member reports? Board member reports? Unfinished business. Then do I have a motion to move into executive session? Discuss.
So motioned.
Second.
I can just do a voice vote, can I? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Oh, also,
Say,
I do not expect to ask for any
oh, don't,
authorizations or approvals after the executive session. Probably just adjourn and be
okay,
done for the day. Sorry.
appreciate that. Okay, so we're